get flash flooding.
Allah Rahman.
It's raining in Cairo.
You are looking at one of the oldest stone statues of a king, named Djoser. And this Greek period model shows Old Kingdom Pharaoh Djoser's greatest monument, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Almost 4,700 years ago, in 2686 BC, the architect Imhotep designed Djoser's tomb, the Step Pyramid, starting the Pyramid Age.
This is King Djoser's serdab with his statue inside, so he looks out for eternity at the stars. But a vandal came here with a long stick, stuck it through the hole, and took out his eyes. So now, poor King Djoser, who was looking out at the sky and at the stars for eternity, straight in this direction, cannot see anything anymore. However, if we repeat his name, he still lives. So the Vandals are not the victors.
After Pharaoh Djoser, the next ruler would attempt to build the perfect pyramid.
And in the end, Pharaoh Snefru, after 2 failed attempts to build the perfect pyramid, came up with the design for his perfect pyramid, now known as the Red Pyramid here at Dashur.
Pharaoh Snefru would go on to have a very prosperous reign, and his son, Kufu, would build the Great Pyramid at Giza. I don't think Snefru could have ever imagined the spectacle behind the pyramids. Along the grand staircase, we get a taste of the architecture of ancient Egypt. At the pyramid of the 5th dynasty pharaoh Sahura in Abu Sir, he erected 12 of these gateways, one of which we can see at the gem.
Like the obelisk of Hatshepsut, this makes a gong sound when you hit it. That's amazing.
It's incredible that over the thousands of years, much of ancient Egypt still remains a mystery. These monuments were not just for show, they were a way to connect with the gods. Amenhotep III could not have merely invented a god called Aten, so what is the Aten actually? Where did it originate? Aten has long-reaching rays into the past, all the way back to the 5th dynasty in 2400 BC. A collection of over 2,000 separate papyrus documents have been discovered at a site in the north of Egypt called Abu Sir. Here, the pharaohs of the 5th dynasty built their own pyramids where they would be buried. These kings primarily worshipped the sun god Ra, even building a unique temple to the sun. In these Abu Sir documents, Aten is not named as a god. In fact, the name of Aten is merely a word to describe an aspect of the sun god Ra. Aten back then was the crown of Ra, the disc or orb that adorned his head. A part of Ra, yes, but not an independent god. This being 1,000 years before the birth of Akhenaten. Khammosat and Ramses' exploration and re-veneration of the past pharaohs was not only contained to Memphis. They arrived at Giza. Burial site for the family, officials, and pharaohs of the 4th dynasty. The tomb of Meris Ankh, the princess of the builder of the Great Pyramid, was on their list of visited sites, as well as her husband, Kawab. Khammosat had an inscription added to the statue of Kawab. Nearby this tomb in front of the Great Pyramid, Ramses and his prince commissioned a small temple and dedicated it to Isis. Although ransacked through the millennia, some fragments of Ramses' temple remain here. This would make way for Ramses to connect to the great god of the Giza Plateau, Horowra, the Great Sphinx. Around the Great Sphinx there have been several pharaohs building their own votive temples to the god Horus of the Horizon, or Horowra as the Egyptians call him. This resurgence in the worship of the Great Sphinx arose in the dynasty preceding Ramses, where we know from the stela found at the paws of the Sphinx that Tutmosis IV restored the Sphinx and even added a statue of himself in front of the Great Sphinx. Ramses would have visited here several times with his family, including Nefertari and his other children, to give votive offerings to the Sphinx. The so-called Dream Stela names the Sphinx as the image of Pharaoh Khafra. Thus, another way for Ramses to show his devotion to the ancestors of royalty. The statue of Tutmosis IV is now missing, and we can't be sure if Ramses would have added a statue of himself between the paws of the Sphinx, as he did with many other sphinxes around the country. Several objects with Ramses' name have been found around the Sphinx, including many stelae and stone scarabs, even a stela of Ramses showing two bound enemies, Nubian and Hittite. Ramses came here to give thanks for his victories. Yet, in France, at the Louvre Museum in Paris, is a great clue to Ramses' worship of the Sphinx. Between the paws, he had built an offering temple, and the two walls lining the temple are here. One shows Ramses before the Great Sphinx wearing a Nemes headcloth while burning incense, and the other shows the same scene but with Ramses wearing the blue crown. Interestingly, the statue of Tutmosis between the paws does appear to be missing by this time. We know that Nefertari did accompany Ramses to the Sphinx temple on occasion. Ramses had the small rest house built by Tutankhamun renovated to suit his own visits to Giza, and many of the scenes show Ramses with Nefertari and Prince Ramses coming to the site. It was while living at Memphis that Khammosat would travel to many of the Delta sites that had already been there for thousands of years. Although many of these temples of the kings of the Old Kingdom were abandoned by now due to the disruption by Akhenaten and his religious revolution, only a few years prior, the prince would have seen that many of these sites had been left in disarray, and many were in very poor condition after thousands of years in the ancient Egyptian weather. Khammosat proposed a vast country-wide restoration project to his father Ramses. The project would include the restoration of the old cult temples of previous pharaohs going all the way back to the 3rd dynasty, as well as reinstating priests to worship these ancestors once again. Khammosat also set out to restore major monuments in his father's name. Many of the pyramids were decaying. Khammosat had these restored. He restored the pyramid of Sahura at Abu Sir, the pyramid of Userkaf, and at Saqqara, the pyramid of Unas from the 5th dynasty was part of this restoration. with Kayamwaset having Ramses' name stamped on the outside, stating that Ramses and Kayamwaset had restored the Tomb of Unas.
This story of an Egyptian Cinderella seems to be complete fabrication. Yet we have some evidence from ancient Greek writers about a woman that was sent to Egypt and became a queen. But which should we believe? Well, let's investigate the differences between the texts.
Herodotus did live 100 years after the life of Rhodopis and Pharaoh Amasis, so he did manage to get some of his story completely wrong, even admitting it himself. A local folk legend was prominent at the time of Herodotus, saying that the lover of Rhodopis had built her a pyramid for her tomb. The legend says that this pyramid was the third largest of the pyramids at Giza. However, Herodotus went to great lengths to prove in his writings that this was a mere myth, and that the pyramid in question was built for Pharaoh Menkura over 2,000 years before. For centuries, it appears that this myth of Rhodopis having a pyramid continued. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder, Strabo, and Diodorus persisted that this story was true, despite archaeological evidence. However, the confusion could be explained. If Rhodopis was indeed influential in Pharaoh Amasis' reign, because of her profession, she could easily be misconstrued in being in the pharaoh's harem of women. These were often made up of influential women from all around the ancient world. It is known that pharaohs built their queens' tombs, especially in the Old Kingdom. These pharaohs built smaller pyramids next to their own for their queens to be buried in, such as Menkura with his pyramid and the three queens' pyramids alongside. Yet Rhodopis was not a queen, a mythical Egyptian pharaoh queen from the 6th dynasty in 2181 BC named Nittocris accounts for this confusion. Pharaoh Nittocris is said by both Julius Africanus and Eusebius to have constructed herself a burial pyramid. These writers lived around 30 AD, 2,500 years after Pharaoh Nittocris was said to have taken the throne by force. And there is almost no evidence to say that the Old Kingdom female pharaoh that the Greeks shrouded in myth even ruled Egypt. It is feasible, however, that these writers confused the oral histories yet again with another woman named Nittocris from a much more recent date. In 656 BC, Pharaoh Psamtik I sent his daughter to Waset, or Luxor today, where she was to be adopted by a Nubian woman who was ruling in Luxor as the High Priestess, or also known as the God's Wife, Amunim II. Egypt at the time was slowly claiming back its rule after near 100 years under the Nubians. Nittocris was the daughter of a native Egyptian pharaoh, and with her finally becoming the god's wife in Luxor, Egypt was now fully under Egyptian rule yet again. The story of the Nittocris who supposedly built a pyramid and the Nittocris who restored full Egyptian power could easily have been confused by Greek writers who came hundreds of years later. And the daughter of Pharaoh Amasis from the time of Rhodopis was also named Nittocris II, who served as the penultimate god's wife, as well as the final female high priest of Amun in Luxor. All of these tales of Nittocris could have culminated in one fantastic tale retold by the Greeks. For millennia, there has been a debate about where the great conqueror had been buried, for you see, holding Alexander's body would have some sort of threshold over the empire. Alexander had been buried in Egyptian style, as this was the religion that he was leaning toward the most. Ptolemy I is said to have moved Alexander's body a few times, leaving Egyptologists, archaeologists, and historians with a real mystery on their hands. At Saqqara, near the ancient capital of Memphis, is something that looks surprisingly un-Egyptian.
In Saqqara we find an intriguing semicircle of statues that seem somewhat out of place. Despite their poor preservation, these statues provide an insight into art and cultural development under the Ptolemies. Presently their surface is quite coarse, but originally they were probably covered in stucco and painted. The statues are thought to be of some of the greatest classical Greek poets and philosophers, including Homer, who wrote the Iliad, a copy of which Alexander is thought to have kept with him during his conquest. There's also the poet Pindar and the famous philosopher Plato, who taught Aristotle, who in turn would go on to teach Alexander the Great.
More of Medinet Mahdi's past can be revealed. For you see, pharaohs spanning thousands of years would have housed a group of special women here, women whose role was to pleasure the pharaoh, the harem of the kings. Specially selected women, sometimes handed down from mother to daughter, lived out in Fayum. These women were always unique and beautiful. They were treated well by the pharaoh, who expected certain entertainment back as gratitude. One pharaoh in particular is well documented for his visits to the harem in Fayum. This pharaoh built several temples in Fayum, where he planned to further cultivate the oasis. Pharaoh Amunim III. He placed several statues of himself at these sacred sites. He even built a pyramid in Fayum, capped with an exquisite pyramidion made from meteoric stone. These strange-looking sphinxes were made for Amunim and placed in Fayum. Later, adapted for several kings, Ramses, Merenptah, and Susanes. Amunim inherited a peaceful Egypt after his father had conquered Nubia. With a full beard, thick wig, and interesting features, this Fayum statue of Amunim shows the pharaoh as a high priest. He developed the Fayum more than any predecessor, creating large canals to nourish the outer oasis. Amunim successor and son died very young, leaving Amunim daughter, Sobeek Neferu, to become a female pharaoh 350 years before the incomparable Hatshepsut.
What of Sobeek Neferu's tomb? She never had time to build a pyramid. One structure at North Mazguna is suggested to be her unfinished pyramid. However, there is absolutely no evidence of this. There is, however, a place that is most possibly the site of her burial.
We're on our way to go see the Black Pyramid.
The Black Pyramid was built by Amunim III. It was one of two that he had made. Both served as a burial site for many of his family members. However, there are two extra burial chambers inside the Black Pyramid. We do not know who was buried in them, but it is highly possible that Amunim IV and Sobeek Neferu were buried in these chambers. If there was no time to build their own pyramid, it was seen as perfectly normal to be buried alongside a predecessor's pyramid in the 12th dynasty. Even a pharaoh from the 13th dynasty named Horowra was interred in this pyramid.
The Black Pyramid behind me was the final resting place for three separate pharaohs. Yet another pharaoh was placed into Amunim and Sobeek Neferu's pyramid, and his name was Horowra. Horowra was a pharaoh in the 13th dynasty, shortly after the end of Sobeek Neferu's rule in the 12th dynasty. He had a simple shaft tomb in the side of the Black Pyramid. And inside here, we find some of the most beautiful examples of Middle Kingdom burials inside a pyramid. We have his beautiful Kahar statue surrounded by bowls, and then we have the sarcophagus with the body of the pharaoh, and of course, his death mask, which was made out of copper and blue glass. This is the mummy of Pharaoh Horowra, buried with the crook and the flail around him, his arms down, with beautiful jewelry. Now, when they removed the death mask from his head, his skull came with. So when we see the death mask on display in the Cairo Museum, the pharaoh's skull is still inside the death mask, and he is one of few examples that we have to prove that pharaohs were indeed buried inside a pyramid.
At the Cairo Museum, the treasures of Horowra can be marveled upon. This beautiful statue of the pharaoh is known as the Kahar statue. The Kahar was the ancient Egyptian form of the spirit, symbolized by the two open arms, which are placed on his head. Made of wood, he has areas once gilded in gold, like his necklace and fingernails. He would have had a linen skirt attached to cover the detailed midriff area. He wears the Osiris beard to show that he has joined the god of the afterlife. His eyes are by far the most captivating. They are inlaid with precious stones, giving them a realistic appearance of having blue eyes. The pharaoh is stepping out of a shrine. This shrine was to symbolize his spirit coming and going from his tomb at the edge of the Black Pyramid. Other treasures were found inside his tomb, like a miniature form of his Kahar statue and many other pieces of exquisite jewelry. Many of his walking sticks and staves, and interestingly, 5 canopic jars rather than the traditional 4, as well as several jars containing these sacred oils. His mummy was badly deteriorated, yet his death mask is simply spectacular. Made from wood, it was once gilded in gold. He has a short beard made from blue faience tiles. On his brow is the hole where his regal cobra was once inserted, and his eyes have been lovingly inlaid with stones to be as realistic as possible. Just think that Horowra's skull is still inside this mask. All of this discovered in the place where Amunim and Sobeek Neferu were also laid to rest, the Black Pyramid. Inside the museum, we can also find the capstone of this pyramid. It has the intricate name of Amunim III carved around it. This was once placed at the very top of the pyramid. It was pushed off and damaged during the reign of Akhenaten, which was actually a gift for us to then enjoy it close up. But this stone is not of this earth. It was created out of a meteor, adding to the heavenly meaning behind being buried in a pyramid. This imposing structure was to be the last giant pyramid built in Egypt. The start of the intermediate period after Sobeek Neferu's death also marked the end of pyramid building, as by then pyramids were being looted by the suffering population. In its day, the Black Pyramid would have looked much different than it does today. It was made from this mud brick because vast building projects were becoming time-consuming and greatly straining the waning Egyptian economy. This pyramid is built out of mud brick. Many of the mud bricks have crumbled away. You can see here, this is the construction method: mud and straw to construct a pyramid. The last pyramid built before they started using tombs. I'm going to take you up this magnificent structure from the 12th dynasty. Tourists don't come here, so I feel extremely privileged to finally see this pyramid. Let's go. At the top of this pyramid, I found a few clues which could help us understand the erosion. Yes, 3,800 years of wind and sand has chipped away at it. You can feel the intense wind swirling around it, yet there is a more human side to its decay. I noticed that there are several pieces of broken, ancient pottery. These were usually left at sacred sites by people coming to honor the dead. It appears to me that pilgrims coming to this pyramid, instead of leaving the pots at the base, easily climbed up the step-like mud brick and left their offerings at the summit. Thousands of years of visitors wanting to offer to the gods and their pharaonic ancestors climbing up the crumbling pyramid seems to be a very touching thought. This place contained not only the spirits of Amunim III and his family, the spirit of Sobeek Neferu, but also the spirit of the people of Egypt.
If anyone from the layman stood in front of the Great Pyramid and looked at it, they will never believe it's built by a human being. My life is connected with this site.
Pyramids of Giza. Everlasting monuments that have faced endless scrutiny. Yet, they are still to reveal much of their ancient secrets. When people see the pyramids, they often think that these are the only 3 monuments on the desert plateau. However, there is a vast and complex world in the immediate vicinity. If you take a moment from looking up at the pointed mounds and look down, there are endless clues and stories that unveil the 4th dynasty of Egypt from 4,500 years ago.
The first person to be buried here at Giza.
It shows the carpentry skills in ancient Egypt.
Giza is filled with tombs and temples belonging to the families and officials of the pharaohs. These are the people that can help us understand the sacred site more. Many tombs have not yet been fully explored. This place commands many questions. Whose face is on the Sphinx? Who built the pyramids? And what was their purpose? We explore the entire surface of the Giza Plateau to discover the intriguing 4th dynasty family, the workers.
It's absolutely incredible. He's coming up, out of his burial chamber.
And the pharaohs. As someone who has never really cared much for this site, investigating this area has been a real eye-opener to separate fact from fiction.
The people like to dream. They said there is something hidden under the Sphinx. I did drill. 32 drilling.
Come with me to find the secrets of Giza.
The Giza Plateau, a place filled with so many secrets, and I think I know just the man who can help me find the answers. Hello, Dr. Hawas.
Hi, Curtis. How are you?
I'm okay.
Come to my office now.
I'll see you in a sec.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Let's go. What do you see as the biggest misconception people
No,
have?
the reason I was giving a lecture today, and I was told that people, if anyone from the layman stood in front of the Great Pyramid and look at it, he will never believe it's built by a human being because you don't know.
Yeah.
And most of the information written in books are wrong. They say the workmen who built the pyramids worked only 4 months a year, and all the stones came from Torah, and Kufu ruled 23 years. And the stones of the Great Pyramid are 2,300,000 blocks. If you think of that, 2 million in 40 years means every minute a stone to be moved, but this is not true.
It is true to say that people love to hear the facts about the Great Pyramid of Kufu. Like that it is built out of 2 million stones, each weighing a ton, and blah blah blah. This is because there is not much else to tell, and frankly, those facts bore me to tears. If we put several sources together, we can begin to construct a full story of history. These structures were built by man. These people who say that each stone is perfectly cut and exactly even have clearly never visited Giza. For when we look at the pyramids close up, we can see how each stone is roughly cut and made to fit into the next. They are simply not even and not perfect at all. And most of the blocks still have their visible chisel marks. The recent discovery of a fragmented papyrus belonging to an official called Meris tells us exactly where the blocks were quarried and how they were transported via the Nile down to Akhet Kufu, the horizon of Kufu, the ancient name for Giza. Merer also tells us about the casing stones that were brought from Tura, some of which are piled up right next to the Great Pyramid. Merer also goes on to mention the quarrymen and the builders of Khufu's monument. The blocks to build the pyramid were brought to Giza via boat. Amazingly, several boats were found around the Great Pyramid in stone pits. One was reassembled and gives us this glorious boat of Khufu that some believe was used in the construction of the pyramid. Others say it was simply used by Khufu, and others suggest that the boats were never used and were placed there to help Khufu sail to his next life. We know from this papyrus and tombs that the pyramid is for Khufu, but another text inside the pyramid tells us more.
Simsu Khufu, one of the names of the gangs who built the pyramid. The followers of Khufu. This is the red color that Khufu brought, that the workmen used as a graffiti to paint the pyramid. We are sure that this graffiti left by the workmen who built the pyramid.
Similar red texts have been found in tombs near the pyramid.
Most of the people, when they go inside the pyramid alone, they do meditation because the pyramid makes silence. It makes you away from all this trouble, from this world. You feel yourself and you love this moment that you can sit down and close your eyes. It's really a beautiful moment. And that's really, in my opinion, is the magic. Pyramids made the Egyptian to know about art and astronomy.
The largest fate of irony is that Khufu has the most gigantic monument in the world, yet the only image we have of him is a 7-centimeter tall ivory statue that was discovered miles away at the most ancient site of Abydos. The Greek historian Herodotus talks about Khufu being a man who was tyrannical in his rulership, who had 100,000 slaves to build the pyramid. Yet most of what Herodotus says can be dismissed. He visited Egypt 2,000 years after the pyramids were built and wrote tales from oral histories, which were mistranslated by the Greek writer. We can tell this in part by how he adapts the pharaohs' names to become more understood in Greek. Khufu becoming Cheops, Khafra becoming Khephren, and Menkaure becoming Mycerinus. They sound similar, but he clearly misheard much of what he was told by the local Egyptians. We can understand that much of what Herodotus says is pure fiction. He states that Khufu had all the temples closed and banned leaving offerings in them. Yet, a papyrus that has the sons of Khufu recounting stories to the king about the great ancestors clearly tells us that Khufu would order offerings to be left in the temples to honor these ancestors. I don't know about you, but I'd rather believe an Egyptian papyrus from the age of Khufu than a story written 2,000 years later by someone who didn't speak the local language fluently.
People all the time talk about pyramids and
and they talk about aliens and things like that. But the discovery of the tombs of the pyramid builders actually is one of the most important discovery, because it proves from the names of the people that the builder of the pyramids were Egyptians and they were not slaves. And also the recent discovery of the Wadi al-Jarf papyri, that many people doesn't know really about it. It tells us for the first time about the construction of Kufu pyramid. It's a story from the overseer of the workmen. His name is Mirror. He took 40 workmen. He went to Torah to cut the white fine limestone. And after that went to Sinai to bring the cover. And he said the Giza Plateau was called Ankh Kufu, means Kufu lives. Great Pyramid was called Akhet Khufu, means the horizon of Kufu. And he talked about Kufu lived in his palace at Giza.
But where did these pyramid builders and their families live, such as Merer? An overlooked site adjacent to the Giza pyramids can provide the answers. A thick stone wall with a small archway in the middle, now called the Wall of the Crow, separates the domain of the dead from the living. Below the hill and behind the wall is a large settlement that proved to date to the 4th dynasty.
I found the tombs of the pyramid builders, and I found out that there was 10,000 workmen involved in the construction of the pyramid, and they work every day, and they take one day off every 10 days. All the stones for building the pyramid came 300 meters away from the base of the pyramid. We found evidence that Kufu ruled for 28 years. And we have the papyri, or Wadi al-Jarf papyri, tells us about building the pyramid. Then people like to dream, but leave them to dream. But I wrote a book, me and Mark Cleaner, about pyramid, Giza and the pyramid, that have the answer of all the questions that the public has.
The remains of the houses could tell us that people living there used to have a diet of beef, fish, and beer. The village appears to be divided into 2 halves. One for the overseers and their families, and the other with dormitory-like sleeping quarters for the workers of the pyramids. On the slope of the hill was the first cemetery, with more simple-style tombs, and higher on the hill were more elaborately decorated tombs for high officials, such as Peteti, who seems to have been in charge of the payment of food to the workers. For in his tomb, we see him overseeing the making of bread and beer. The tomb of Nefertis explains he had 2 wives who would go to the Kufu pyramid each day to make sure that the workers received enough water on the job. Nefertiti's tomb also contains a warning to all.
Anyone who harms my tomb will be consumed by the Nile crocodile, the hippo, and the lion.
The mummies of these people who lived and worked here reveal to us that they were well cared for. Many people showing signs of successful medical procedures, from limbs that had been placed in splints to a head operation. These men could clearly not have been slaves, as the men and their families were well cared for.
The discovery that you made of the workmen's village, what is the key piece of evidence from there that is the most important, you believe?
That the builder of the pyramids were Egyptians, because all the names were Egyptian names. And also they were not slaves, because they buried in the center of the pyramid. And also the pyramid was a national project of the whole nation. Every household in the south and the north of Egypt participated in building a pyramid by sending workforce and food to help the king.
All these people worked on the building of the pyramids and would make their way to work each day through the Wall of the Crow. The remarkable thing is that when we visit the museum in Cairo, we can witness these men and women at work still. Statues showing them making bread and beer were found at Giza, at the workmen's village, and around the pyramid tombs. We can also see brilliant statues showing family scenes. A scribe and artist named Inti Shedu is still alive in full color, from his turquoise necklace to his mustache. Inti Shedu was promoted to the overseer of Kufu's boats later in his life. Many people who have no education in the background of pyramids claim that they were never tombs, and these kinds of people have a reluctancy to investigate the facts. How do we know that the pyramids were tombs? Well, first and foremost, there are almost 100 pyramids in Egypt. The earliest dating to Djoser in the 3rd dynasty. All pyramids have a burial chamber with a sarcophagus inside. The Pyramid of Unas from the 5th dynasty has some of the most incredible texts inside his burial chamber around his sarcophagus, which tell us that this was his house of eternity, his tomb. There are several papyrus texts that remain mentioning the pyramids as tombs, most notably one from the reign of Ramses IX, where a gang of tomb robbers confess to stealing gold from a pharaoh's pyramid.
We took our copper tools and forced a way into the pyramid of this king. We found the Lord laying at the back of his burial chamber, and we found the burial place of the queen beside his. We opened their coffins and found the royal mummy of the king equipped. We collected the gold that we found on the mummy of the Lord. We set fire to their coffins.
We as Egyptologists have all the evidence to prove that pyramids built by Egyptian, it was a tomb for the king.
Yeah.
But the people who talks about aliens and people came, they don't have any evidence, just dreaming.
Yet, I hear you exclaim, "But Curtis, there were never any mummies found in pyramids." Wrong. There have been a few mummies discovered in their pyramid burial chambers, such as Merenra, the father of the 6th dynasty pharaoh, Pepi II, whose mummy was discovered in his pyramid at Saqqara. Then discovered by Dr. Zahi Hawas, the decayed and charred remains of the 6th dynasty queen, Shesheshet, also discovered in her pyramid at Saqqara. And records state that inside Djoser's pyramid, in his looted sarcophagus, there was a mummified foot remaining, now lost. And of course, my favorite discovery inside a pyramid, at the pyramid of Amunim III. In a side chamber, the mummy of the 13th dynasty pharaoh, Horowra, was found with his funerary goods fully intact. His decayed corpse was found in his coffin, with a beautiful death mask placed over his mummy. When archaeologists tried to take the death mask out of the coffin, his skull was glued into the mask with resins and remains there till today. And even more intriguing is what was found in a pyramid at Giza. What inspired Pharaoh Kufu to construct the pyramid? To get closer to the answer, we must go 30 kilometers south of Giza. At Dashur, 2 pyramids can be found, both belonging to the father of Kufu, the bringer of beauty, Pharaoh Snru. He was in pursuit to create the perfect pyramid. In this venture, he had a pyramid made at Dashur that was problematic. They made this pyramid way too steep. The stones started to crumble and push out on the sides when they reached the middle, so they had to change the angle, resulting in this mess. Snefru erected a large stela at the bent pyramid before abandoning it. He then tried again, resulting in his perfect pyramid. And in the end, Pharaoh Snefru, after 2 failed attempts to build the perfect pyramid, came up with the design for his perfect pyramid, now known as the Red Pyramid. Between these 2 pyramids, we can find the tombs of many officials and family members. Snefru's son, Nefair's tomb contained a beautiful scene showing the prince as a high priest, wearing a leopard coat. Other family members buried around the Red Pyramid were Ka Nefer, who oversaw the building of Snefru's pyramid, Nechet Rapef, and his daughter Nefer Nesut. We know from papyrus texts that Kufu had visited Snefru's pyramid in pursuit for inspiration for his own tomb. We have the words of Kufu's son, Jedefhor.
His Majesty the King of the Upper and Lower Lands, Kufu, has spent the day seeking for himself the chambers of the sanctuary at Jed Snefru in order to make something similar for himself, for his horizon, Akhet Kufu.
The words in the papyrus reveal that Kufu had indeed gone to the pyramids of Snefru to prepare the planning for his own pyramid. We also know that Snefru had a smaller pyramid built for his queen, which was used as the tomb for his secondary wife. His first wife, who lived longer than the pharaoh, named Heta Perez, was buried at the site of Akhet Kufu. It is possible that the wife of Snefru and the mother of Kufu was the inspiration for the location of the Giza burials. Queen Heta Perez, the mother of Kufu, was the first person to be buried here at Giza. She was buried in a shaft tomb similar to this one. This is when the tomb was discovered. It was quite a spectacle. Inside the tomb, we found her sarcophagus, along with flat pack furniture, and some of the most splendid finds in the tomb of the mother of Kufu, the woman that inspired the Giza Plateau. They found a chair, a golden chair, and bracelets that went all the way up the queen's arms, decorated with silver and butterflies. So this, a normal pit tomb, is what inspired this vast necropolis. Over at the National Museum of Civilization, Dr. Sahar Salim has some fascinating information on the treasures of Heta Perez.
Here she is. Dr. Salim.
Oh,
Hi.
Curtis. What a dynamic, Curtis.
It's beautiful. I can't wait to see what you're going to show me.
This is the chair of Heta Perez, mother of King Khufu from the 4th dynasty, found inside her tomb with other luxurious furniture of her. This is a custom-made chair for the queen. You can see the base. It's a wide base, and the height of the legs are very short. This could tell us that she could be a big lady and a little bit short. It was custom made to make her sit comfortably. That's why there is sort of sloping of the seat. It's a little bit longer in front than in the back. It's 27 centimeter in front, while it is only 26 centimeter at the back. Also, the height of the arm are perfectly made in order to suit comfort. This was very important to place here in Civilization Museum because it shows the carpentry skills in ancient Egypt.
We have around the pyramids, we have the mastabas and the tombs for family members.
Yes.
And that helps us to prove that...
No, the most important proof that we have now is the Wadi al-Jarf papyri.
Yes.
It tells us for the first time about building the pyramid, and the diary of Mirror, who was the overseer of the work.
And the fact that it's a tomb,
Yes.
The family members of Kufu are buried around the pyramid. On the southern side, we can find the tombs of his brothers, sisters, wives, and children, although many of the tombs are laying in ruin now from 4,500 years of weathering and tomb robbing. Some tombs have exposed much about Kufu and his family. The pyramid of Meris, the sister and wife of Kufu, contained a false door, which features many of the royal family members. By having this false door, this also proves that her pyramid was in fact a tomb. Another pyramid for a queen is that of another sister and wife of Kufu, Henutsen. Inside her pyramid, we have her giant sarcophagus, as well as 2 other burial containers for her daughters. Henutsen and Kufu had 3 sons together, 2 of which were buried in mastaba tombs near their father and mother, namely Minkaf, who served as the vizier to his father toward the end of his reign. Minkaf's giant granite sarcophagus can now be viewed in the Cairo Museum. The next son was Khufu Khaf, the herder of the sacred Apis bull. His tomb was directly in front of his mother's pyramid. His tomb was elaborately decorated inside and out, with many scenes showing the prince with his mother and his wife. Outside his tomb is a broken image of Khufu Khaf and his father, Khufu. It is evident that the male behind is Khufu, from the ceremonial bull's tail worn only by the pharaoh at the back of his kilt. Another brother of Khufu, named Ankh, was also interred in a tomb with the family in Giza. Ankh played a big role in the building of Khufu's pyramid. He was the overseer of the Lake of Khufu, Ra-She Khufu. According to the papyrus of Merer, this was the stopping and control point for the transportation of the stone blocks to build the Great Pyramid. This area was under control of Ankhaf. He then later raised his status to vizier. A tomb at Giza from the reign of Kufu has one of the most beautiful scenes from the Old Kingdom. The daughter of Khufu, Nefertiabet, is shown seated before offerings. She's shown with long black hair, wearing an exquisite leopard print dress, which does impress much. Many of Khufu's family were in high-powered positions, including high priests and priestesses, indicated through the leopard print. The burials spread to a nephew of Khufu named Hemiunu. His tomb was discovered in 1912 on the western side, around high officials' tombs. His large mastaba is badly damaged. However, a marvelous statue of Hemiunu remains, showing the man in a lifelike manner. The statue names him as the architect of Khufu. This man designed the Great Pyramid. The western tombs around the Khufu pyramid are not the burial sites for just family of Khufu, but also the officials, courtiers, and some pyramid workers. In actuality, the legacy of Pharaoh Khufu appears to have stretched far beyond the populace of his own rule and dynasty. Men and women of the 5th and 6th dynasty wanted to be connected to the burial site of the great ancestor Khufu as a way to push their souls into the sky and be reborn in the new world. For these people, the connection to the Great Pyramid would ensure them a prosperous eternity.
Let's go see the tomb of Idu. From the time of Pharaoh Pepi, these beautiful statues of the man waiting for his spirit coming out before the hetep, the offering table. We just see him from here. It's absolutely incredible. He's coming up out of his burial chamber, just waiting for his family to bring the offerings. The tomb, of course, is below. This is just the chapel. So beautifully decorated, so fine and precise, like so much of the Old Kingdom art.
Idu was a judge, or as the ancient Egyptians called it, determiner of disputes. He also held the very important role of overseer of the priests of Khufu's spirit at the Great Pyramid. He was given this role by Pharaoh Pepi I of the 6th dynasty. The entrance of his tomb contains a curse, stating,
Any man who enters my tomb with impure intentions shall be painfully punished.
A lighter side to Idu is that he had his wife, daughter, and his son and successor represented in the tomb with him. Offerings were left here for Idu, and right next door, offerings were left for his son, Kahar. Kahar had his tomb constructed next door to his father. He became the overseer of the priests of Kufu, Khafra and Menkora, and Merenra. Kahar was first a scribe, who became the overseer of the village and eventually a priest of justice. He has lifelike statues at the end of the tomb that show himself at stages of his life, as well as his wife and son. Left of this room is where Kahar was laid to rest behind a sealed wall. There appears to be a succession of a family line of men all named Sashem Nefair. This family appear around the end of the reign of Kufu and continue to the end of the 6th dynasty. They were of very high status and had their tombs constructed at the base of the pyramid of Kufu. In a temple-like manner, Sachem Nefer II erected pillars at the start of the path between the other tombs on the way to his tomb, in a sort of mortuary causeway fashion, similar to what the pharaoh would have. Even his tomb on the outside appears like a temple. By the time of Sachem Nefer IV, his tomb was now made as a funerary temple and tomb all in one. His large pillared tomb has 2 statues of the man himself seated outside, made from granite. Next to Sachem Nefer are miniature obelisks. He served as manager of the 6th dynasty pharaoh Pepi II's harem and palaces. The outer walls show Sachem Nefer with his daughter and other family members bringing offerings to him. However, the idea of a temple-like tomb can be found dating back to the 4th dynasty at the end of Khufu's reign, with several of his officials sharing similar designs. Many treasures and entire tombs have been spread throughout the world from Giza, including the Neues Museum in Berlin. 4,500 years later, some of these tombs can now be marveled at in Berlin. This tomb belonged to 2 men, one the mayor of Memphis and the other the overseer of the mortuary temple of the pharaoh.
Mehen and Neferu, they were nobles that lived during the time of Pharaoh Kufu during the 4th dynasty while the Great Pyramid was being built. Here we see Neferu holding the staff to show that he's a nobleman in full color. And as we go down, we see Neferu with his hand up, showing that he can write. He's about to start writing something on a wall. And up here is his boss's name, Kufu, the owner of the Great Pyramid. And this entire mastaba was taken from Giza and brought here to Berlin.
Kufu had many of his loyal followers buried close by around his pyramid.
This is Merib, the commander of the troops during Pharaoh Khufu's reign. We see Merib here as he's entering his tomb, his name written here, Merib, with the heart scarab as his name ending with the B. And here we can see Khufu's cartouche, Ka-U-Fu. It's just incredible to think that this is from the time of the Great Pyramid. That's around 4,300 years old. It is absolutely mind-blowing.
In the doorway, we see a family scene of Merib, his son, daughter, and his wife welcoming the body into the tomb.
And here is Merib, the commander of the troops for Pharaoh Khufu, and his beautiful wife, dressed in the traditional 4th Dynasty dress with the breasts exposed and a high-waisted skirt. I wonder how they brought this all the way from Giza to Berlin.
The 4th Dynasty was one of the highest points. However, after the death of Khufu, many family quarrels would cause many issues, including the end of a dynasty. The tombs dotted around the Great Pyramid of Khufu go from the simplest mud brick with almost nothing notable about them to wondrous displays of grandeur.
And even some tombs here at Giza are still decorated in full color.
Nesska, a priestess of the goddess Hathor and Khufu's spirit, has one of the most delicately decorated. She is thought to be the daughter of Pharaoh Snru, a later 5th Dynasty king. She may have even been the descendant of the high official Senib, the famed dwarf from the reign of Khufu. A descendant of Senib named Senakt is shown in the priestess's tomb. Her tomb also features the name of a son and successor of Khufu, who is shrouded in speculation. Jedefra. Khufu was not the immediate successor of Pharaoh Snru. A prince, son of Snefru, and brother of Khufu, was the first in line to the throne. Yet this prince died young, and his brother Khufu became the successor. Rahotep and his wife Nofret were buried in a mastaba tomb by the unfinished pyramid of Snefru at Maidum. Their statues are some of the most realistic and lifelike in all of Egyptian art. Their perfectly rendered features and eyes give us the best idea of what the 4th Dynasty Egyptians resembled. As for the successor of Khufu, this should have been Prince Kawab, the eldest son of Khufu. Yet, he died suddenly, leaving his wife Heta Perez II behind. Kawab's brother married Heta Perez II and was named as Pharaoh upon Khufu's death, becoming Pharaoh Jedefra. Naturally, speculation surrounds Kawab's death, leaning toward the idea that Jedefra killed him to become Pharaoh, linked with the fact that he married Heta Perez II to secure his succession, and built his pyramid away from Giza. He only ruled for 7 years before being succeeded by his brother. Heta Perez II lived a very long life, dying in the reign of the 4th Dynasty king Shepseskaf. And interestingly, she was not buried near Jedefra, but rather Kawab, her first husband. Over at the Namek Museum, some of her treasures can be marveled at. Although the most impressive, from royal implements to ceremonial objects, has to be a female-headed sphinx from the pyramid of Jedefra, with the name of Heta Perez herself. Another clue that Jedefra needed his wife and wanted her as a sphinx to protect his tomb. Many have even gone as far as to say that the Great Sphinx of Giza was commissioned by Jedefra to show his father's features and thus reinforcing his legitimacy. This theory comes from the Sphinx of Heta Perez II, quite a way to be remembered as the first human female-headed sphinx. With Jedefra now dead, the next son of Kufu had his time to shine, building the second largest pyramid at Giza. Pharaoh Khafra. Very little is known about Khafra the man, but like his father, his family, courtiers, and workers were afforded the opportunity to have their tombs created in the shadow of his pyramid. This way to raise their level of prestige to nearly that of the pharaoh himself. One such man was Ka-Insut, the chief hairdresser of the royals, whose tomb is next door to the Great Sphinx, the very first in the central field of burials. His other titles were the Guardian of the Diadem, which leads us back to the Cairo Museum, with its almost endless hallways and secret rooms filled with overlooked treasures, where we can still see one of these 4th Dynasty diadems. This golden diadem sits atop what looks like a bust or a reserve head of a princess, but you would be wrong. In fact, this is the head of a princess's mummy. Mummification evolved over time. Around the 4th and 5th dynasty, for a short period, mummies were coated in mud and then plaster in an experiment to preserve the deceased's facial features, rendering them more lifelike. For these men and women, especially royals, their faces needed to be recognizable to the gods to enter heaven. Examples of these are rare, but some have skulls visible through the broken coverings. Like the princess, her skull still visible, head broken off near a beautiful faience beaded necklace. Looking at her, this is as lifelike as an ancient could get. Inside the museum are many treasures from Giza and the 4th dynasty that many simply walk by, some with the most intriguing details. One of these scenes from a son of Khafra shows a woman representing towns bringing in offerings for the king. We can even see Khafra on a boat, the king seated on a throne, holding the flail. Strangely, the man before him has been hacked out. Boats were extremely important, as we know, and some tombs in Khafra's necropolis have scenes of boats. A tomb of Ankhenib was shared with his wife. Toward the middle of Khafra's reign and pyramid construction, there was a significant strain on the economy. We even see tombs of officials that are roughly decorated, or even some made from mud brick, surrounded by people's burials of a lesser, higher status. Walking through these tombs, it feels as if one is in an ancient city. Then again, it was but a city for the dead. Many tombs have been looted and the bodies destroyed. But in one prince of Khafra named Ankh-Mara, his body was found along with his son. This is the view that the spirits of these ancient people witnessed. Tombs covered in fine writings, jutting out from the golden sands of ages. Below the pyramid of Khafra is another set of burials, most dating to his children who outlived their father and took on important roles under the 5th dynasty kings. Khafra is believed to have had over 16 children from his 4 wives. His eldest son, who served as vizier, priest, judge, and scribe, named Nyakara, was buried in the cliff below his father's pyramid. He was destined to be the next pharaoh, but died before Khafra. His father had this triad statue carved into the cliff, showing Nyakara, his father and mother, as a way for his family to assist him in reaching the next life. And having other royals buried in the cliff served as a multi-purpose tomb. Although, one strange thing you notice about Khafra: he did not build pyramids for his queens. Instead, he built tombs for them. Could this have been an indication of the bad economy? His first wife, Ka-mer-Nebti, was buried at Kufu's pyramid near the most magnificent tomb made for his second wife, and I'm going to take you inside.
The tomb for Meris Ankh is closed, so just waiting for them to go and get the guy with the key so I can go inside.
Meris Ankh was the second wife of Pharaoh Khafra. Her majestic tomb is one of the best for a queen in all of Egypt. Her chapel has a wall with statues of 10 women to accompany the queen, presumably her ladies-in-waiting, or her children, family members, and king's wives. The absolute highlight of the tomb is a wall featuring Meris Ankh in the middle, with all 6 of her children around her. Her eldest son, Nebe-Makt, who became Khafra's vizier. Her youngest daughter and son are shown at her feet, one holding the royal hoopoe bird. Meris Ankh is shown wearing a white and yellow dress with a cat's face on her hip, and a short cropped hairstyle. She holds the queenly implements. Before her are the titles She Who Sees the God Horus and Set. Yet another strong woman is shown before Meris Ankh, an elegant and regal woman, another queen whose appearance fascinates the imagination. Many Egyptologists suggest that this is Heta Perez II, the mother of Meris Ankh. However, Heta Perez II is shown in the tomb already on the opposite wall. The mother and daughter are shown sailing on a boat together, Meris Ankh behind her mother. And she has long black hair, unlike the woman with the short blonde hair. Heta Perez II is always shown with long hair, even on a statue of her and Meris Ankh. In my opinion, this blonde-haired lady named Heta Perez is none other than the mother of Kufu, Heta Perez I, leading Meris Ankh, her great-granddaughter, into the next life. We have Heta Perez here shown with the blonde hair. Oh, it's died. Shown with the blonde hair over here, and these strange pointed shoulder pads, almost something like out of the 80s. Opposite this is the father of Meris Ankh and the son of Kufu that died too soon and didn't fulfill his destiny to become the next pharaoh, Kawab. He is seen holding a staff, while symbolically leading in a parade of offerings into the tomb of his daughter, capturing birds of the marshes, where he recounts.
Meris Ankh pulls papyrus for Hathor in the marshland with her mother. They see every good thing which is in the marsh.
A row of men and women bearing offering baskets for her from Khafra, Jedefra, and her grandfather Kufu. A fleet of boats are seen transporting the queen. She is shown under a canopy and seated on a throne, and craftsmen are shown making spirit statues of Meris Ankh. On the queen's false door, she is seated on a lion throne. The door where her spirit could visit the tomb to receive these offerings. These offerings, led into the tomb by Kawab, were collated in spirit by her chief steward, Hemiunu, who is shown several times in her tomb. At the entrance, he is shown reading a papyrus before the queen, who is standing with the jackal god Anubis above. Reri, another steward, on the other side, bringing in a hyena to the queen. These canine creatures were connected to the leader of the dead into the next life. Through the arch, we enter her inner sanctum, where once a year the sun would light up a second false door, energizing her spirit. This room leads us down into the queen's once sealed burial chamber.
I'm inside the burial chamber, deep below the tomb of Meris Ankh, the princess. The lights have just gone out, which is a little concerning, but I wanted to show everybody what was found in this tomb. This is Meris Ankh's sarcophagus, her stone sarcophagus, which had been plundered in ancient times. This is the remains of Meris Ankh inside her sarcophagus, all pulled to pieces. This is quite sad to see, because the people came in here looking for gold and they ripped her body apart to find all the gold inside. And this is the skull of Meris Ankh, the skull that was found in this very room I'm in right now, in the dark, with no electricity. This is the princess. We're coming face to face with her in her final resting place. It's quite something to be face to face with Meris Ankh. And this is a list of all the things that were found in the tomb of Meris Ankh. And this tells us that all the gold was taken out because all that was left over was her sarcophagus, a wooden false door, and some stone statues and stone vases. But this, in here, tells us more about the princess than any other thing inside this tomb. The bones of this princess, what was remaining, is what tells us more than any of the decorations on her tomb. You can hear the echo. I think I'm just going to have a moment to myself. Even though Meris Ankh's burial chamber is not decorated, it has these quartz crystals inside the stone, so that when they left the candle burning in the tomb, as they left, all of these would have been twinkling, these little shiny stones, like the night sky for Princess Meris Ankh.
Texts in her tomb read,
Great favorite of Pharaoh, priestess of Hathor, mistress of Dendera, the companion of Horus, beloved of him. May she proceed in peace upon the paths on which an honored one proceeds, having gone well with her in the sight of the great God. May offerings go forth to her at the first day of the festival. Meris Ankh, she who loves life, one who is noble in the sight of Anubis.
when her tomb was sealed, her soul would hopefully fly up to be greeted by a set of motherly figures, whom would protect and look over the Queen's final burial site. To record for eternity, the Queen had scribes carved into the walls. Scribes were heavily important in ancient Egypt. They would take dictation from the king or officials, send international correspondence, assist with diplomacy, study religious texts, and compel the words of the gods, something Meris Ankh wanted to ensure. The sad thing is, Meris Ankh died middle-aged, presumably from silent sinus syndrome, evident in her skull, causing mucus to build up and breathing difficulties. She died just after her husband Khafra, before her tomb was ready, yet the successor king had her tomb completed, and she was buried 275 days after her death. Khafra's greatest achievement is his pyramid tomb, named in ancient times as Weren Khafra, meaning the spirit of the sun god Ra. Khafra is great. Khafra, the son of Kufu, had his pyramid placed next to his father's. It may appear larger, but it is not. Only looking larger due to the rise of the plateau. The pyramid is reached via a long causeway that begins at the Valley Temple of Khafra and the Sphinx. Along the causeway are tombs of people Khafra would have known, but a strange set of tombs lay right next to the causeway, dug into the sides of a large square pit that many suggest was originally a water well, with canals filling it from the Nile in front of the Sphinx temple. This causeway would have been the king's final journey on the mortal earth, where his mummified body would be carried in a grand procession in the presence of priests, queens, princesses and princes, high officials, and his successor. This procession would end at the mortuary temple at the base of his pyramid, where his mummified body would be fully prepared with the final touches before being placed in his granite sarcophagus inside his pyramid. He would have the rites of opening the senses performed to ensure he would be able to function when his soul moved onwards. This temple, now in complete ruin, is also where Khafra would be worshipped as a god after his burial. Inside would have been several alabaster statues of the king, of which only one is still intact, each separate chapel containing a statue. Boat pits were also found around this temple. In the 1800s, Belzoni said that all he found inside the pyramid's sarcophagus were animal bones. But these bones are now gone and thus can't be checked by experts. Khafra's pyramid was once cased in white limestone, yet plundered over the centuries. All that remains are these impressive upper casing stones. Above all, probably the greatest enigma of the Giza Plateau is the Great Sphinx. Of the thousands of sphinxes made in Egypt over the thousands of years, this giant remains the largest and most mysterious. The human-headed lion sits at the edge of the Giza Plateau, in front of all three of the king's pyramids, and the numerous other burials. In essence, the Sphinx is the protector of the site. For you see, this was the actual purpose of a Sphinx in Egypt, the protector of a sacred site. Although this creature may appear to be elegant, serene, and beautiful, for the ancients, it was crafted to strike fear into the viewer. Yet, there are various forms of sphinxes in Egypt. This specific one was the guardian. Lions have always played a large role in Egyptian religion. The male lion god, Aker, being the lion on which the sun rested as it rose each day. Yet, whose face is on the enigmatic beast? Some have suggested that it predates the Giza pyramids. However, evidence disproves this. 1,000 years after the death of Khafra, during the 18th dynasty, a young prince named Tutmosis IV erected a stela between the paws of the Sphinx, or, in its ancient name, Horem Akhet, Horus of the Horizon, telling a fantastic tale.
Hunting lions and flocks, and riding in his chariot, his horses faster than the wind. The hour came to give rest to his followers at the limbs of Horem Akhet. Prince Tutmosis came passing by at the time of midday, and he sat down in the shadow of the great god. Sleep seized him, asleep at the time when the sun was at its zenith. And he found the majesty of the noble god speaking with his own mouth, like the words of a father for his son, saying, "Look at me, see me, my son Tutmosis. I am your father, Horem Akhet, born of Atur, and I shall give you kingship on earth, in front of all the living ones. You shall wear the white and red crowns upon the throne of Ger. The earth shall be yours, in its length and width. Everything that the eye of the Lord of all illuminates. The food of the two lands shall be yours, as well as the great tributes of every foreign land. Your lifetime will be a time great in years. My face is yours, my heart is yours, as you are a protector to me. For my current condition is like one that is in need. All my limbs, as if they were dismembered, as the sands of the desert upon which I lie have reached me. So run to me, to have that done which I desire. Know that you are my son and my protector. Come forth, and I shall be with you. I shall be your leader."
Unfortunately, the stela is damaged, and the story begins to break off. The final legible lines state,
The king's son awoke hearing this. He understood the words of the god, and he put them in his heart. They shall protect the offerings to the god, which we bring for him, oxen, fruit, and all vegetables. And we shall give praise to the ancestors. Khafra's image, seen by Atur, Horem Akhet.
This last line gives us a strong indication that the Sphinx was created in Khafra's image. Preceding Tutmosis IV, Amenhotep II completed work on a new temple built to the side of the Sphinx, now known as the New Sphinx Temple, and set up a band of priests whose sole purpose was to give offerings to the Great Sphinx. The temple seems to be along the same design as Old Kingdom solo temples, which would then be connected to the worship of the sun god, with ceremonies being performed on a raised platform reached by staircases, connecting Horus of the Horizon, the Sphinx, to the majesty of the rising and setting sun. Many small stela indicating this have been found in the temple, dedicated by priests, some even from hundreds of years later, from the reign of Ramses II. From these stela, we get the impression that Tutmosis IV had a large statue of himself placed at the paws of the Sphinx, behind the dream stela. The addition of a pleated Osiride-style beard was also added in the 18th dynasty, as this was not present during the Old Kingdom. Fragments of this beard are now in the United Kingdom. The giant cobra from the Nemes crown of the Sphinx is also broken off through the millennia and is now on display at the Cairo Museum. Tutmosis IV did not stop at simply uncovering the Sphinx, adding the beard, then also having various cracks filled in, and most strikingly, he had the Sphinx repainted. Many of the blue, yellow, and red paint flecks are still visible on the ancient visage and Nemes headcloth. The Sphinx has undergone several makeovers in its lifetime. The Romans, 1,000 years after Tutmosis IV, were captivated by the Sphinx, yet again uncovering it from the sand, building a new staircase to the paws, and adding a casing of limestone bricks around the body to protect the very soft and crumbling limestone mound that the entire Sphinx was carved from. The question has always been asked, if there were tunnels under the Sphinx? Well, the answer is yes and no. The Romans had dug several tunnels under the Sphinx, only to discover that it was solid stone.
The Sphinx, they said there is something hidden underneath the Sphinx. I did drill, 32 drilling, and I found the Sphinx is a solid rock and living rock, and there is nothing underneath.
Yeah, exactly.
Major important things. And also, when people always accuse me of hiding evidence of lost civilization, and I always say, how can you hide evidence? When I found out the water table rise in front of the Sphinx, I had to drill. I did drill 32 drilling around the Holy Sphinx. Wow. And I found out that the Sphinx is a solid rock and a living rock, and there is really nothing is underneath the Sphinx.
Many centuries after the Romans, the Arab conquerors would deface the Sphinx when they found the locals still leaving offerings before what they saw as a pagan idol. The occasional Egyptologist is led to theorize that on the chest of the Sphinx is the Egyptian heart glyph, making the name Weserib, meaning great heart, a throne name of Khafra. However, some dismiss this lump to be a support from when the 18th dynasty beard was attached. Apart from the evidence of the dream stela mentioning Khafra, another reason to believe the Sphinx was made by this pharaoh is the two temples in front of the beast. The so-called Old Sphinx Temple was created from the same limestone as the temple next door and Sphinx itself. It is also aligned perfectly to the Sphinx and the setting sun. This temple was never finished, leading some to speculate that Khafra had died before its completion. The temple never received its outer casing of granite and ceremonial statues, unlike the other. The Old Sphinx Temple is also the exact same design as the mortuary temple of Khafra next to his pyramid. The temple next door, the Valley Temple, we know was built by Khafra, as on the granite facade, evidence of his cartouche was discovered. Yet the inside of the marvelous construction confirms who it was for. Inside the granite columned hall, 25 statues of Khafra would have stood. Only a few survived these 5,000 years. If we head back to the Cairo Museum, the full might of Khafra can be contemplated. This life-size statue of Khafra from his valley temple, made from a greenish diorite stone that had to be specifically brought from the deserts of Libya. The hyper-detailed image shows the delicate yet powerful features of Khafra. His name and titles appear at the base, adjacent to his feet, with even the toenails that have been rendered lifelike. Seated on a throne with papyrus motifs, headed by lions. One hand relaxed, the other making a fist, as he wears only a pleated kilt with the ceremonial bull's tail attached. However, the beautiful face and well-physiqued king is not the highlight. At the back of his striped nemes is a beautiful symbol, a falcon with its wings opened and enclosing the king. This falcon is the god Horus. The pharaoh is Horus on earth. This falcon is protecting the king and connecting him to the eternal rebirth of the sun. The temple, with its splendid granite columns, was once roofed with slits cut in to allow the sun to shine on the statues of Khafra. The light would reflect up off of the polished alabaster floor. At the side chamber is where the sacred act would take place. The valley temple is where Khafra's body would have been mummified for 70 days upon his death. One side of the temple is dedicated to the goddess Hathor, the other to Bastet, and played the pivotal role in preparing the king to become one with Osiris in his rebirth to the next life. When this site was in use during the 4th dynasty, the Nile would arrive right before the Sphinx temples, and the flood was controlled through canals leading to the plateau and tombs. There were even 2 ports created where the boats would dock and bring the precious cargo, including many royal visitors. The same boats that we see and read about from the carvings and papyri left over. The modern district of Giza would have been flooded in ancient times with the great Nile River, making the landscape we see now a much different place. Many tourists overlook the docks, yet this would have been the main point of entry to the site. Khafra's causeway began at the Valley Temple and led up along the Sphinx, ending at the foot of his pyramid, making way for the next pharaoh.
What do you imagine the pharaohs 1,000 years after Khufu thought of the pyramids? We see like Tutmosis IV with the dream stealer. What do you feel that they might have...
No, but because pyramids were built in the Old and the Middle Kingdom.
Yeah.
It were tombs. And in the New Kingdom, they took the peak in the Valley of the Kings, and they buried the tombs underneath that one.
Yeah.
Then the Egyptian, during the Middle Kingdom, most of the New Kingdom, the king of Atil's dynasty, were actually lived in Memphis.
Yes.
And they had training in the desert of Memphis. And this is why they used to come to the pyramids, like Amenhotep II, Tutmosis IV, and they just looked at it as the pyramids of their ancestors.
In marveling at it. Yeah.
The third and smallest pharaoh pyramid at Giza belonged to the son of Khafra, named Menkaure. In the 12th century, the Sultan and son of Saladin demanded the pyramids be deconstructed and the treasures inside be destroyed as they stood against Islamic values. His men spent 8 months dismantling the smallest king's pyramid. They never found the entrance, and contrary to the myth, they never tried to blow up this pyramid. A third of his pyramid was cased in granite. Many of these pieces are strewn across the desert surrounding the monument. The granite nearest the entrance was engraved with a prayer for the pharaoh. It is possible that due to economic issues, Menkaure had a smaller pyramid with many of his nearby monuments being unfinished before his death. To the ancient Egyptians, their wish was to become part of the eternal stars, to live on, and for their name to be remembered. Leading up from Menkaure's mostly intact causeway, you will arrive at his mortuary temple at the base of his pyramid. This is where the pharaoh wanted to be remembered. However, he never finished his temple, with its labyrinthine side chambers and hallways leading to the great courtyard, and completely roofed-off offering rooms that probably were planned to hold a spirit statue of the king. The temple is mostly made from limestone and with finishings of granite. It was completed by Menkaure's son, Shepseskaf, made out of crude mud brick, as attested by Shepseskaf himself. Inside the sun-bathed courtyard was a colossal white alabaster statue of Menkaure, an immortal image of the king shown in absolute perfection.
So, inside the temple of Menkaure, right at this door, in 1907, they found a beautiful alabaster statue of the king. There's his head, exactly where I'm sitting right now. That's how it was in the sand, completely covered in mud. But we see Menkaure shown here. Beautiful eyeliner, the strap for the beard drawn on, and a moustache. Something that was quite unique was facial hair on pharaohs. Yet Menkaure is shown with this beautiful painted-on moustache. However, the statue was in complete ruin, obviously from when the roof fell down right behind me here. Yet this beautiful statue of the king shown with his painted-on eyeliner and the strap for the beard and his beautiful, unique moustache. When this statue was taken to Boston, to America, to be restored, this is the final image. Now, when we see the gaps that have been filled in and the statue has been cleaned, Menkaure has had a shave. Menkaure
no longer has a moustache. This alabaster statue may be beautiful, although the most breathtaking statues of Menkura were found hundreds of meters away from his pyramid, buried beneath the golden sand, and are now located in the Cairo Museum. Discovered in his unfinished Valley Temple at Giza, these triad statues of Menkura show the king wearing the white crown. Beside him, on two statues, are him with goddesses. One identified as Hathor, the other representing a nome or region of the kingdom. It is possible that these women are really his two wives. The primary wife, Ka-Emrebnebeti, represented by Hathor, and the secondary wife, Reketra, as the regional goddess. One triad statue includes a young regional god of Waset, which could be symbolizing his son and successor, Shepseskaf. His pyramid was one of the strongest and most secure. The interior did not survive ancient tomb robbers. In 1837, English explorers discovered something astonishing inside Menkura's pyramid. In the burial chamber was a granite sarcophagus, as well as an elaborately decorated wooden coffin belonging to Menkura.
O the Osiris, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Menkura, living before forever, born of the sky, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Menkura, living forever.
These texts on Menkura's coffin are found in early pyramid texts, which summon the sky goddess to protect the king and assist in his resurrection. But most shockingly, there was a mummy inside. Although only the upper torso and legs remain, scientists have not been able to 100% accurately date these remains, believed to be Menkura. Unfortunately, the granite sarcophagus sank with a ship that was transporting it back to England, along with the other set of bones of a woman discovered in Menkura's tomb as well. Unlike his father Khafra, Menkura had built 3 queen's pyramids near his own. Each queen's pyramid had a small mortuary temple attached, believed to be the tombs of 2 principal wives of the king, and the central pyramid being for his sister and the daughter of Meris Ankh, named Shepsetkau. Even though Menkura is attested with around 18 years of rule, relatively shorter than his father Khafra and grandfather Kufu, there are still many tombs for his officials near his pyramid. Much of the limestone for his temples and pyramids were quarried from the Giza Plateau itself. Not wanting to waste the cliff of limestone, many of his officials and family had their tombs dug into the rock. Issued with having only 2 wives and 4 children,
One of the largest tombs in the quarry belongs to the eldest son of Menkura, yet this son must have died young, as he never succeeded his father. Horowra became a scribe and secretary of his father. His tomb is created as a large colonnaded hall. When the tomb was entered in 1934, a seated statue of Horowra as a scribe was discovered. Inside the tomb is the prince shown with his mother, Queen Ka-Merenebeti II, where he is shown holding a royal hoopoe bird. There are an estimated 500 burials here, with more still to be discovered. Some of the burials here include the director of the royal dining hall, overseer of Menkura's quarry, noblemen and women. These tombs, dug straight into the limestone cliff, are not grand nor well decorated. These people did what they could afford, like this tomb, the false door, thoughtfully decorated in green. 2 shafts suggest this was a shared tomb, and many skeletons have been found at the quarry tombs in shafts, buried in the fetal position. Many tombs led on to the next, showing a clear sign of community between these men and women, like Ankh-Nebef, an oarsman and spirit priest of Menkura. Tombs in the quarry tell us that even high-status people now had less grand tombs. Like Sekemka, he was Menkura's chief judge and high priest of Ma'at, the goddess who inspired the divine theology of balance behind all custom in ancient Egypt. Among the many mysteries of the Giza Plateau, one more than any other interests me the most. Menkura was succeeded by his son Shepseskaf, ending the 4th dynasty. This is where things get muddy for Egyptologists. A controversial, yet absolutely thought-provoking tomb way out in the desert near Menkura's sand-flooded valley temple, dedicated to a high-powered queen. Decorated on its lower half with a false palace facade, this strange tomb consists of a 2-terraced structure, similar to a step pyramid. This tomb was never finished, but was intended to be the 4th pharaoh's pyramid at Giza.
Behind me is the tomb for Queen Kent-Kawes, possibly the first ever female pharaoh.
Kent-Kawes, evidence points to her being the daughter of Pharaoh Menkura. She was married to her brother, Pharaoh Shepseskaf. However, when he died, his possible son, Userkaf, was too young to rule, and therefore Kent-Kawes took up the role as pharaoh, becoming the first in recorded history. The titles on the granite pillars can provide more clues. Here, her titles read Mother of 2 kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, while another mentions Khentkawes as the ruler of Egypt. There is even an image of the queen sitting on a throne with what some believe is a king's Nemes headdress.
We get some people speculating about Khentkawes. Some people say she was a pharaoh, but there's no
we
proof
still
of
wouldn't
that.
really know.
Yeah.
But we think that she ruled as the last king of dynasty 4.
Yeah, because she's shown with some people believe
Yes,
is wearing a
yes,
Nemes.
yes.
Her tomb was entered in antiquity through a robber's tunnel and ransacked. The inside decorations of her tomb are very fragmented, and only pieces of her alabaster coffin with faience inlays were discovered. However, I fear that the secrets of Khentkawes are for another day. She had a small mud brick mortuary temple built, yet by her time the area between her temple, Menkaura's temple, and her unfinished pyramid was inhabited with workers from the end of the 4th dynasty. At the back of the pyramid, carved into the large hill of stone, are many tombs dotted in the hillside, undecorated and unnamed. Were these people that were close to Khentkawes, her officials, or later 5th dynasty tombs? This too might remain part of her mystery. A piece of stone jutting out of the sand. Read the word Pharaoh. Alongside it, a false door, a fragment resting in the shadow of Khentkawes' pyramid. These came from a large tomb in the near distance, with its own offering chapel in the form of a mini temple. This large mastaba was for the royal hairdresser who started his noble career during the last days of the 4th dynasty. With a burial chamber deep below, the mastaba above served only as a ceremonial purpose for Horowra and his family. Later in his career, he received the ranks of administrator, judge, and then army overseer. 2 busts of Horowra remain. Various tombs are scattered around the pyramid of Khentkawes and the mastaba of Horowra, some more grand and some more humble, just simple shaft pit tombs dug straight down. Evidence of settlements are found between and sometimes in these tombs, although now only inhabited by ghosts and reptiles. At the back of Khentkawes Hill are even more tombs, some with very long passageways leading down to elaborately decorated tombs from the end of the 4th dynasty and beginning of the 5th dynasty. The tomb of the scribe Ra-Tesen, with the man coming out of his tomb to meet with the sunlight. This is one of the last Old Kingdom tombs at Giza.
What does Giza mean to you?
No, Giza, I spent all my life living there and excavating and working in front of the Sphinx and tombs of the pyramid builders. Completely, I lived even in front of the Great Pyramid for 2 years. Then my life is connected with this site.
And if you can tell people one word about the pyramids, what would you describe them as?
The one word I could say, it's magic.
Yeah.
To everyone.
Yeah. Magic and secrets. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shukran.
The Giza Plateau still holds so much history, so many mysteries, some more tangible than others. Be that as it may, we are ever closer to understanding the secrets of Giza.